On this episode of Athletic Training Chat, we have Karen Fennell, who was the previous chair of COPA, amongst the many, many other things she does within the NATA and just service in athletic training. And we had connected months ago on we're going to discuss COPA and had issues on both sides figuring out a time to do this. So we finally got to have the conversation after she had left that position, but really got into the history of COPA and its evolution, which I think was really interesting and fascinating just to hear how much it has evolved over the years and the importance of that and how it's tried to adapt as the profession has, and really what their goals are moving forward to help try and support athletic trainers across the profession and these new practice advancements. So a lot of good information here that I think was really good just to have some background on exactly what they do. As always, we are powered by Mueller Sports Medicine. Check them out for all your sports medicine needs. Can't thank them enough for supporting us as the podcast and the AT profession as a whole. But without further ado, please enjoy this episode. Welcome to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We're on with Karen Fennell, who is the outgoing chair of the NATA COPA committee that just happened, a couple months ago now when we look at it. But we have been trying to connect for quite a while to have this conversation, and finally everything lined up to do so. So here we are. And before we jump into everything, let's really just kind of talking beforehand. Getting the history of it and why that's important is going to be a huge focus. I want to turn it over to you in order to share, kind of your background and how you got to where you are.
Thank you, Joel. I appreciate it. I appreciate the opportunity. I know connecting schedules was a little difficult with me being the outgoing chair. But like many athletic trainers, I started out at the collegiate level. I thought I was going to be a college athletic trainer for the rest of my life. I spent a little over 11 years at both Division I and Division III, both as an assistant and a head athletic trainer. And in 2003, my supervising team physician said, "Hey, why don't you come work for me?" And so in 2003, I transitioned to physician practice. And from there, had an opportunity to go work with another orthopedic group. And during those 11 and a half years, 13 years, I guess, between collegiate and physician practice, had an opportunity to really understand a lot more about healthcare. Um, and more importantly, also in the physician practice, had an opportunity to learn about durable medical equipment, workers' compensation, a lot of the other things that maybe athletic trainers we weren't certainly educated on as well as athletic trainers. But then in 2016, I started my own business. I started a consulting business to help physicians who treated workers' compensation patients to develop their access points, if you will, for their patients to treat it more like a sports medicine model. Little Johnny gets injured at football practice. The athletic trainer picks up the phone and calls the team physician office. That's what we do. But when John, little Johnny's dad, gets injured at work, how do they access appropriate care? And so we were able to kind of utilize that sports medicine model to help physicians streamline those access points. And around about that same time, I was contacted through LinkedIn by a recruiter who was looking for a medical device salesperson, and had an opportunity to start my transition from physician practice into medical device sales. And so I started that in 2016. And about 2.5 years ago, transitioned from Missouri out to the great state of Pennsylvania. And I've been out here for a little over 2.5 years as the director of bracing for Empire Med Group. And we are in 8 states now across 4 time zones. So we are in Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, New York, Georgia, Florida, Southern California, and now Hawaii. And so as a director, I have an opportunity to work with director reports across, like I said, different time zones, which can be a challenge, but I'm always up for a challenge. So I really enjoy medical device sales.
Awesome. Well, kind of starting from the beginning of it, what is the Committee on Practice Advancement, or COPA? And again, we talked, and however you want to pull all this in together, kind of the origin story of everything.
Sure. So the mission of COPA, the mission statement, is to represent those professional practice settings that perhaps might not get the love that some of the others typically do, or are more recognized than others. And we're trying to do that utilizing awareness, doing podcasts like this,
Hmm.
demonstrating value of AT services, and more importantly, how can we as COPA assist in the efforts to expand and advance the profession? So that's kind of the mission statement of COPA. I break it down into kind of three categories: is providing resources to the NATA membership, providing education, and more importantly, identifying and providing subject matter experts in these practice settings. And who are those practice settings? There's kind of 10 practice settings that are encompassed underneath COPA. So the kind of the COPA umbrella is on top. And then we have 10 different panels, and each panel is a chair with 3 subject matter experts. And so looking at where we have these subject matter experts placed, we have them in analytics and outcomes. Those are our number crunchers. Those are the people that go in and they data mine. If you have a question and you have a data set, you have a question about that data set, they will go in and they'll mine that information for you. We have armed forces, which is looking at working with the armed forces in the United States. But also, if you think about the Coast Guard and the Space Force and some of these other ones that people typically don't think about. And we have community outreach, which is a subset, if you will. It's not secondary schools, because the secondary schools committee is separate, but we found that there was a gap of ATs who are employed by somebody, but then are sent out into the community. That community could be out to a high school, that could be out to a college, that could be out to a local junior football league, it could be out to a soccer tournament. They have special needs because they're employed by one entity, but then they're answering, to another entity when they're being contracted out. So we feel like our community outreach folks really weren't being represented very well within that secondary schools committee structure, because most of them are direct employees of the school districts. We have our healthcare administration team. We're all healthcare administrators. Every single athletic trainer in this country administers a healthcare program in one way or another. But looking at healthcare administrators, that could be an athletic trainer who became an athletic director. It could be an athletic trainer who started administering an outreach program. So that's where they're tied in with community outreach. They could also be the COO of a hospital, an athletic trainer that moves their way up through the hospital ranks, for example. Occupational is kind of seen as industrial, but really occupational could be the armed forces, because if you're getting paid to be a soldier and you become injured, it's an occupational injury. If you're a police officer and you become injured, it's an occupational injury. So we really tried to broaden that scope of the word occupational away from industrial. And then we have our performing artists. If they are getting paid to be a performing artist and they become injured, well, that's also occupational. But we
Sure.
also have performing artists that are performing arts majors at colleges and universities, as well as other entities in the US, as well as cheerleading falls underneath there, acrobatics, dance teams. So there's a wide variety of the performing arts. Physician practice, I started that in 2003. So that's 21 years ago. That was a long time ago. So we've really emerged very well into that practice setting. And now from physician practice, we're thinking about urgent cares, emergency rooms, and other aspects of physician practice. We have our private practice and emerging settings panel, which during the 4 years I was COPA chair, about 80 to 85% of the inquiries I received were athletic trainers that wanted to start their own business. So we
Sure.
know that that is a huge, huge opportunity for ATs to not just be employed by someone, but to be the employer. And that private practice could be rehabilitation. It could be instrument assisted. It could be dry needling. It could be concussion navigation. It could be as a consultant on emergency planning. It could be community outreach, hiring athletic trainers to go in and work the Boston Marathon, for example, whatever it might be. So that's a huge, huge area where we know that athletic trainers are thinking, instead of being the employee, of being the employer or employing themselves. Athlete trainers in public safety, working with federal, state, and local public safety entities, police, fire, ambulance, all fall underneath that public safety umbrella. The rehabilitation clinic, obviously we have athletic trainers in pockets that are working directly in patient care. And finally, we have at-large positions within the COPA umbrella. So it's 44 slots altogether, but we have our at-large positions so that we can fill gaps. Maybe we identify somebody who really has a really good education background, but is also involved with the armed forces, for example. But we also have folks who are really good about communication and understand social media platforms, which is not my gig. And so having that ability to have somebody that you can rely on to deal with Twitter is amazing. But we also need to get this information out to the membership. And then finally, we would not be able to do what we do as COPA or any other committee or council within the NATA without an NATA board liaison and an NATA staffer. And so having these key people be involved with COPA has been outstanding, and it helps keep this big beast, we know it's big, keeping it moving forward.
So that covered a lot of my first question. So thank you for doing all of that. But as you just mentioned, it being a big beast, and yes, having everyone who's all those different areas and people that are in charge of each of those, from your vantage point, being the chair, like that's a lot to manage and keep track of and pay attention to. And as I'm sure everybody's well aware, because we've interviewed people from these different societies that have kind of sprouted up, that complement a lot of the things you just said. How do you go about giving attention to everything and really help driving it forward, as you had mentioned?
I think two things is finding the right leaders, finding the right chair that understands the mission, and helping them form their team. Years ago, I was coming back from NATA in Kansas City, and I want to say it was probably like 1998, 1999. I was sitting on that was then TWA. It was before American Airlines bought TWA. And I'm sitting on the flight. I sit down. This guy sits next to me. And come to find out, he was the treasurer for the state of Missouri. And so we just struck up a conversation, and I said, "Oh, are you flying? You're flying to St. Louis on business?" And he goes, "Oh, no, I had an event here in Kansas City, and now I'm going to St. Louis, and then from there I got to go back to Jefferson City." And I said, "Oh, you live in Jefferson City, the state capital?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, what do you do there?" He goes, "Oh, I'm the treasurer for the state of Missouri." And as we started talking about, you got to think about the millions and billions of dollars, right? And I asked him, I said, my first question was, how do you do it all? And he's like, you just have to find the right team below you. And you have to just, if you instill the right team with the right mission and the right vision, it's easy. He said, it's challenging, but it can be easy if you get the right pieces of the puzzle. And I think that that's the key to this whole thing is I am not a subject matter expert on performing arts. I have never worked in the performing arts, but I learn, I listen, and also, if you find the right chair and the right subject matter experts, it really does make it easy that they can communicate up to me and I can communicate down to them. And I think the second part of that is realizing I can't do it all. I have a day job too. But because of my day job and because of the flexibility I have, I'm able to be on a call with you today. I'm able
Hmm.
to carve out a little time to maybe just be on the first 15 minutes of one of the panel calls. Do I have to be there for the entire call? No, but just having the grace of my position and being able to carve those out. So I just think we know it's big. I don't know where it's going to go 3 years from now or 5 years from now, but I think that it can, with the support of the board of director liaison and with the support of the NATA staffer, it makes it much more manageable.
That makes sense. One of the things we were talking about before, and I think this would be really interesting, is ATA has exploded as COPA has basically shown. From there, beyond the secondary, the collegiate, the professional, obviously those are still huge, but it is finding its way into so many other areas. And again, if people are on social media or even just talking to colleagues, there's always the question of, what is an ATA doing for me? And you had talked about one again off before we got on this, and please elaborate, the importance of the history of it and how it's grown and expanded to meet the needs that have been presented. And if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing that, I think that would be really enlightening, because again, even I'm not overly involved in the NATA, and the fact that I haven't been on a committee or not part of a lot of those things, may hopefully here sometime in the future. But
Sure.
those stories are enlightening because I think sometimes it's not as known as it probably should be for whatever reason that might be.
Sure. Yeah, what I particularly enjoy is speaking to the people that came before me, my mentors. Somebody had to lay out this track for the train to go down it. And so, really, the history of COPA started in 1987. And in 1987, I was graduating from high school, so I just dated myself. All right. But the Clinical, Industrial, and Corporate Committee, or the CIC, was formed. And it was a very contentious committee to be formed because at that time, our forefathers were collegiate and professional sport athletic trainers. And they didn't feel that athletic trainers needed to be in the clinical setting, working alongside physical therapists, working alongside physicians, working in the industrial space. They just didn't think athletic trainers belonged there. And so that was the same year the Secondary Schools Committee was formed, so 1987. So as secondary schools started realizing, well, now colleges and pro sports have athletic trainers, why don't we? So you saw an uptick in athletic trainers at the secondary school level. And so I think it's important to see how some of these committees came about. They either were melded together or they are eliminated. So starting in 1987, then we started realizing the mid 1990s, reimbursement was at the forefront. And so the Reimbursement Advisory Group was formed in the late 1990s. About that same time, the Council on Employment, or CO, was formed. And so I had an opportunity to speak with the second chair of CO, the Committee on Employment, or excuse me, the Council on Employment, to talk about what were they talking about in the year 2000. What challenges were they facing? And it's a lot of the same challenges and conversations we're having today.
Sure.
In 2004, the Committee on Revenue was formed, and that was core because we have reimbursement, but then you have other revenue streams that needed to be into account. And so in 2008, the Clinical, Industrial, Corporate Committee and the Council on Employment merged in 2008 to become CPAT, Clinical and Emerging Practice in AT. So that was kind of the first formulation of of where we were at that time in 2008. In 2014, we took CPAT and combined it with the Committee on Revenue because, again, we start talking about reimbursement and revenue and return on investment, some of these other conversations. They formed the first initial Committee on Practice Advancement. So that's what I call COPA 1.0 in 2014. And the reason I call it 1.0 is because it was a committee at that time. And we had 10 districts at that time. Now we have 11. And it was district based. So if it was a committee and it was district based, if 3 different districts sent a physician practice person, well, what about performing arts? What about public safety? And so we realized that that committee structure really just didn't work very well, and that we needed more cooks in the kitchen. We needed more subject matter experts. And so in 2018, we started these conversations about how we can take this committee, this COPA 1.0, and making it much more like ICSM, looking at subject matter experts at Division 3, NAIA, JUCO, Division 2, Division 1, Power Division 1. And so we created the Council on Practice Advancement in 2019. And so throughout this history, dating back from 1987 to 2019, the NATA has been responsive to the variable needs of the membership. And I think it's vitally important to talk about that history and the then and all the way into now.
Agree. And I think showing that responsiveness, which is oftentimes a critique that people have, is important.
Yeah, I agree. And being able to show that when a new issue comes up, when COVID hit, boy, we dropped what we were doing and we focused on COVID. And so whatever the needs are of the membership, that percolates up from the bottom, from the members, and it percolates all the way up to the board of directors, and it percolates up through a lot of the committees and councils that we have at the NATA level. And so whatever the buzzword is of the year or of the 6 months, whether it's AI or whether it's resiliency or whatever these buzzwords are, you know, we are responsive, and we now feel like we have a structure to be responsive to those practice settings.
Kind of an offshoot of this, but just because, again, some of the things I see is, people are like, well, how are people listening? And, whether they're just tagging the NATA on social media or whatever it may be, specifically from your point of view within COPA, just because it spans so many different areas. If somebody like had an idea or wanted to get an issue that they thought was important up through, just if you could, what's the easiest way for people to do that? Because I think sometimes it's there, do you just tag people on Twitter and hope that somebody reads it, which may or may not be, the best thing, or it may just not get seen due to whatever reason. But if there are people, because a lot of people do want to get connected, what would be, your advice to them if they just want to get a message across, not necessarily get involved in all the other things there, but just to say, hey, here's a concern that I'm seeing and wanted to bring it to attention?
Absolutely. I think it's multi-pronged. That's what your state leaders are for, because it might be a local state issue. I always say start with your state association. Then you can go to your district president, your district director, all the way up to the district board of directors boardroom, all the way up at the NATA level. And especially when people think it might be a national issue, when really it might be a local issue, always start with your state leaders. They're the ones who know your state practice acts. They are the boots on the ground, and you probably know that person. I am not, I don't want to say that I'm not on social media. I am. I don't go across all of the platforms because of my own mental health. I just stick to a couple. But I think when you tag the NATA or you tag state association or the American Medical Association, you have to sit there and go, I wonder who's reading that. And does that person have any power? Does that person have that ability to get the information to the right person? And so I think that when you do tag somebody on social media, whether it's an entity or a person, a lot of times they'll then in turn, send an email or send me saying, hey, you need to go onto Twitter and take a look at this thread. And see if you have any advice or suggestions. And that's part of advocacy. That for me is advocacy, is being able to go on there, read some of these threads, and perhaps guide someone who might be ill-informed or uninformed down the right path. There's the blame game. It's easy. It's easy to point a finger, but I think people need to understand who does what and who are the different stakeholders in our profession. The NATA is just one stakeholder. We have the BOC, we have Katie, we have the foundation, we have the NATA Political Action Committee. So we've got all of these different entities, again, working together to try to advance the profession.
Appreciate that. Now I'm reflecting on your time in there and just kind of what you potentially see going into the future, specifically around COPA. Where do you see the non-traditional, in quotes, sorry, I gotta throw that out there, settings and their importance to not just the athletic training profession, but also to the NATA and what that looks like moving forward?
Sure. There's a lot of words. I'm very particular about my words. And so obviously my Zoom background is ATs and emerging settings, or NATA. When you use the word traditional, non-traditional, emerging settings, for me, and this is my opinion, I stole a word that I prefer better. I stole a word called non-foundational settings. And I stole that from past President Kathy Derringer. Because we have a foundation, and our foundation really was professional and college sports. That's where we started. That's our foundation. And then we built a house on top of it. Now, what that house looks like, it could be a 4-story mansion on top of it with more room to grow. And so I prefer the term non-foundational, just because I think when you say non-traditional, it says that you're not an athletic trainer anymore because you're not on the sidelines. And I think we need to kind of change our thought process. I have not been on the sidelines since 2003. And believe me, I still keep up on all of my skills. I haven't worked football since 1989. But I still keep up on all my skills. I do. And that is my professional responsibility. But just because I'm not on the sidelines taking care of athletic patients, that doesn't mean I'm not an athletic trainer. And so people say, oh, I'm going to get out of athletic training. I'm going to go work in a physician office. Well, you're still an athletic trainer. You're utilizing your education, your skills, your competence, and everything that you bring as an athletic trainer, regardless of the 4-wall, ceiling, and floor. Where I see this going in the future, as we update our practice acts to properly reflect our education, training, and competence, that is going to open up even more doors for practice settings. And the NATA is helping lead that and helping update practice acts. For example, in Missouri, our practice act was written in 1983. It went into law in 1983, and it was in law prior to physician assistants and nurse practitioners. And it really hadn't been updated until 2020. So we had to pour in a lot of effort, but also a lot of expertise from the NATA to get that update to properly reflect our patient population and our education and our training and our competence. I think also where it's going, this is just a little stat, the U.S. Army is placing a lot of athletic trainers working with the armed forces. They estimate over 600 athletic trainers will be working with just the U.S. Army by 2028. That's in 4 years. That's just one division of our armed forces.
Sure.
Then they want to take this model and go, maybe it's to the Air Force next, maybe it's to the Marine Corps, maybe it's to the Air Force, wherever it goes next. It's going to be it's going to probably be the largest employer of athletic trainers across the country. So that's not to diminish athletic trainers working in performing arts, martial arts, equestrian, cheerleading, just all of these different practice settings where athletic trainers are really trying to get their foothold. And so I think when you see the word emerging settings, you are going to hear more about equestrian. You are going to hear more about breaking from the Olympics. You're going to hear more about dance and acro and cheer and martial arts. Um, and one other thing I think is important is one of the initiatives that came out of COPA and was years in the making was looking at who we are as athletic trainers is important, and who employs us, what is our practice setting, what four walls, ceiling and floor, but also who is our patient population. So my employer might be a hospital, but my practice setting might be secondary schools.
Mm-hmm.
My employer might be a physical therapy clinic, but my practice setting might be pro sports. But more importantly, who is the patient population once I get out there and start treating patients? So we need to do better on data and being able to properly identify athletic trainers who are doing maybe what I do in business marketing and sales. Being able to properly identify our members is vital so that we then can get the resources directly to those folks.
I like it. What else around COPA would you like to cover that we haven't? I feel like we've kind of gone through most of the questions I had for you.
Yeah, I think it's just important to understand the history of what came before us
Yeah.
and what COPA will do in the future. Maybe it recreates itself, becoming the word occupational, and we stick a lot of these other armed forces underneath occupational. We stick public safety underneath the word occupational, and then we create industrial. Who knows where it's going to go in the future? And I think that once we have a better feel for the data of our members,
Mm-hmm.
then they can look at that structure and say, maybe we need to take physician practice, healthcare admin, and community outreach. Maybe those need to go into a council of itself.
Sure.
And then occupational is over here. So I think that it's not done evolving. It's not done emerging. It's not done with expanding. So I'm really excited to see where it's going to go in the next 5 years.
That's awesome. Well, with that, you kind of fed into my first athletic training chat question is where do you see athletic training going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Ooh, I think practice acts are going to be vital. I think we have to keep our thumb on the pulse of deregulation. And if you think that deregulation can't come to your state, pick up the phone and call somebody from Illinois or Colorado when all of a sudden they were talking about eliminating the Board of Athletic Training or the Board of Massage Therapy or the Board of Physical Therapy. Smaller government discussions are real. And when deregulation comes knocking on your door and somebody wants to take that license away from you or your ability to call yourself an athletic trainer, that's a big deal. And getting California over the finish line, getting them some type of recognition, hopefully it's licensure,
Yep.
keeping the foot on the gas pedal in California. And I think getting out of this mindset of just the athlete, it's physically active individual. And that physically active individual is a broad range. It's not just an athlete anymore.
For sure. Yeah, we had an episode with the AT that we talked from California that talked about that, and while I had always kind of heard about it, hearing some of the actual stories, it was just like, oh yeah, that
It's a challenge.
It would be a problem. It could be a problem for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And the amount of work that it takes, the groundwork, the foundational work in order to be successful in any state capital is mind-blowing. And the conversations you have to have with other healthcare professionals. And so really developing those good relationships with those other healthcare professions in your state is absolutely vital. And having the physicians have our back is the only way moving forward. So California's and they're a big state. I think people don't realize that what it takes for somebody from San Diego would have to fly literally to the state capital, where in other states we could probably drive it. maybe not Texas
Sure.
or Alaska, but it's a big state with a lot of variance across from northern to central to southern California. So I
Yeah,
really am hopeful and hopefully helpful to California to keep them moving forward.
absolutely. What advice would you go back and give yourself as a young athletic trainer? And if you could set kind of when that would be?
I dated myself by saying I graduated from high school in 1987. So I'm now 32 years in. I'm more on the retirement end of the spectrum. I think I would tell myself to be okay with change, keep an open mind, understand basic business principles earlier,
Sure.
understand how healthcare works, how business works. Always ask questions, continue to ask questions. I have little books here on my desk based on topic. So whether it's a work topic or whether it's a volunteer, I just keep books and I just write down notes all the time so I can come back and, and
Yeah.
refresh. So always be able to, to ask questions and continue to network with your colleagues from not just in your region, but across your state, your district, the national. Uh, and finally, always keep your resume up to date because you never know when somebody says to you, "Hey, would you consider this role?" Or "Hey, I think you've got the right skill set." Being able to put pen to paper and making sure that your resume is always up to date is vital. You just never know with the divergence of athletic training and the variety of roads that are presented to us now, you never know. And I will say that having build by building a network across the country, when I moved from St. Louis, Missouri, 900 miles away and moved to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, I had a network of people I could pick up the phone and say, "I'm moving to Philly." And so that in and of itself made the transition easier for me because I knew I had my AT colleagues that I could pick up and ask questions, pick up the phone and, hey, should I live in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania or not? So it was just an easier transition because I had my AT family.
Nice. What has been the most influential resource you found in your career?
I would say my colleagues and my mentors.
I kind of wondered from that last statement if it
100%.
didn't work. Yeah, if that was coming.
When somebody I got a text message from one of an athlete trainer colleague back in Missouri. I've known him since probably 1993. And he texted me and he's moving to Colorado. He says, "Hey, do you know much about how to become licensed in Colorado?" And I said, "No, but I know somebody who just left Missouri 3 years ago and moved to Colorado." So I texted her and said, "Hey, how was the process? Was it easy?" She goes, "Oh yeah, it was easy. I got my license within a month." And so, being able to have those connections. And if I have a question about the BOC, if I have a question about Katie, I have a network of people that instead of just calling up the BOC or calling up Katie, I have my network of people. And so I feel like between phone calls and text messages and emails, being able to hopefully, get the answers I'm looking for. Or more importantly, they'll say, "No, you need to call the BOC. And here's why. And here's who you call at the BOC, or here's who you call at the NATA. Here's who you call at Katie." And so having that capability is it to me is immeasurable, but also your state leaders, your district president and your district director, they are that pipeline directly into the NATA as well.
As an AT in your role, how do you take care of yourself?
I have learned to give myself grace. And what I mean by that is there are only so many hours in the day. And I have a start time and I have an end time. And some days my end time might be 9 p.m. because I'm working with people in California.
Sure.
Some days my start time is at 7 a.m. Sometimes it's at 8. So giving yourself that grace, and what I mean by grace is from 5 to 7, my phone goes on silent and it goes face down on the charger. It sits on the side, and that's when I cook dinner. That's when I water my plants. That's when I go outside and play with my dog. I give myself that 2 hours to do, to do kind of self-care, if you will, things that are enjoyable for me.
Sure.
And
Yep.
then when I pick up that phone again and I look at it, oh, my California team is blowing up my phone, then I can reset and go take care of whatever I need to get taken care of. But I think sticking to it and giving myself guardrails is absolutely vital. And knowing my limits, I can't do it all. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Brooklyn, but when I go to Brooklyn for work, you're very tied up just finding a parking spot or just commuting or all of these other things. And so putting guardrails on myself about what I can get done in a day is vital, I think, to keep me balanced.
I like that. I like that approach. If you could eliminate one thing, could be a modality, a common practice, a mindset, or whatever of your choosing in the field of athletic training, what would it be?
I mentioned it a little bit before about removing the term non-traditional. I,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
like that term because it does make it seem as though we're not athletic trainers anymore.
Yeah.
And when a physician becomes the chief medical officer at a hospital, they're still a physician.
Yep.
When a physical therapist starts their own company and they're not in patient care anymore, they're still a physical therapist, but they also happen to be a business owner. And so I
Yep.
think, not getting into identity, but just trying to remove that term of non-traditional and changing it to non-foundational.
Yep.
And I think the second thing is for people to better understand when you want to point a finger, make sure you're pointing it at the right entity. The NATA has a role, the BOC has a role, the CATIE has a role, the foundation has a role, the NATA Political Action Committee has a role. We are all in this together. And understanding what's the purpose of the NATA as a membership organization, understanding the BOC as a credentialing agency and continuing education, understanding the folks at CATIE that make decisions about going from a bachelor's degree to a master's degree. And just understanding those roles, I think, is key because people like to point fingers. And I think if they just step back and learn about what each entity really does, it would give them a better opportunity to voice opinions and to voice it in the right direction so that it's
Sure.
heard in the right direction to the people who are the stakeholders, the people who are the people who can change.
I think that's good advice there at the end. Last question. What does being an athletic trainer mean to you?
It means home. And what I mean by home is I've been to every NATA annual meeting starting in 1992. For me, it's like my second family reunion with
Sure.
my friends and my colleagues.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to talk about healthcare. We have an opportunity to talk about service. To me, it gives me a lot of happiness, a lot of joy. The relationships that I've built with my colleagues and my mentors, but also with the students, that next generation,
Hmm.
those early professional career advancement folks, students, and making sure that again, I'm standing on the shoulders of my mentors. Somebody will eventually be standing on my shoulders, and then eventually somebody will be standing upon their shoulders. And so for me, it's really given me a second identity,
Sure.
not just Karen Fennell. It's given me an identity as an athletic trainer, and I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.
We have not heard that take on it yet. I really like it. So thank you for sharing that. Well, just to
Uh,
wrap things up,
it's from the heart, believe me.
uh,
It's from the heart. It's been
you,
a
you can
it's
definitely
been
tell.
yeah, I'm very passionate, obviously, about my service, and I'm very passionate about this profession, and I want to sit back and watch the next generation take it to even better heights and higher heights.
Definitely. Well, if people wanted to connect with you, reach out, ask a question like we talked about, or just connect, what would be the best way for them to do so?
Well, I just took over as the NATA Political Action Committee chair, so my contact info will be on the NATA website soon, when we get everything changed over. But I'd be happy to provide my contact information to you, and you can put it up as a slide at the end of this, whether it be
Sure.
my email, my social media. Again, I'm limited on Twitter. I'm more of a Facebook person. I've never been on Instagram in my life. And definitely, yeah, I'm not a TikTok person. But email, phone calls, text messages. I'm better with the phone than I am email anymore. So people are free to have my phone number and call me at any time.
Sounds great. Well, thank you for taking the time. Truly appreciate it. It was great to just get more information on COPA. I know I learned a ton. The history was fantastic and just showing the evolution of it over what is kind of a longer time, but not that long of time for how quickly things move. It was really interesting to hear all of that. So thank you again for taking the time to share that.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to delve into some of these issues as well as people, and connecting and being able to give platforms like this, because I think any opportunity we have to share who we are and what we do is just
Mhm.
vital. So I commend you on this.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Well, until next time, hopefully at the next NATA, if not sooner, I look forward to connecting again.
I got to keep my streak alive. So I look forward to seeing you in Orlando next year, or word on the street is it's coming back to Philly in 2026. So it'll be my backyard. So
There
that's
you
what the
go.
word on the street is. Don't hold me to that, but I look forward to connecting with you in person.
Sounds good. Thank you again.
Thank you, Joel.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Athletic Training Chat. We hope you took a lot away from it. Again, as I mentioned in the preview, I learned a ton just hearing about the history of COPA and the evolution and really what they're trying to do to, again, support as many athletic trainers as they can across the spectrum of all the practice advancement that is going on within the profession. If you are interested in the idea of journaling or something you've wanted to give a try, check out the Athletic Training Daily Journals, geared specifically towards athletic trainers to focus on leadership, management, practice, reflection and growth, communication, service, and some cognitive biases. You can go to clinicallypress.org/shop to find a 14-day free trial, no payment information. You just go through the checkout and download it, or go right to Amazon and get it there. Just search for Athletic Training Daily Journal. Got more things hopefully coming out in the future around that, some other ways to look at journaling, but if you're looking for something specifically to athletic trainers, this one's for you. Thank you again for listening. If you want to be on an episode, please let us know. We want to hear from you, but we will catch you next episode.